Welcome. I'm Sebastian Mahfood, and you're listening to WCAT Radio, the on-air wing of En route Books and Media, bringing you the dulcet sounds of Catholic wisdom with today's show and speaker.
Welcome to the Lost Voice radio program, where we seek to rediscover the lost voice of wisdom first spoken to Socrates over 2,000 years ago. John Studi, welcome today.
Well, thank you, Jacob. I appreciate you inviting me over to our radio show. It's been a while since we've last spoken.
No, it's not. We just had a show last week.
I know, it's been a long time.
That's true.
It's a long time to stay away from you.
That's true.
Thankfully, Justin's not here, though.
Yeah,
scoundrel.
no kidding. Hopefully he's listening. Although we can say probably whatever we want about Justin because he told us last week he hasn't listened to every episode now. So chances are he's not going to listen to this.
I don't know about you, but I'm terribly offended by that.
I am too.
And I thought he was my friend. And, you know, when he was up in Washington, Dick Harbor, Washington, for 4 years, by the way, called him every other day. And he doesn't even do us the dignity of listening to our show every single week. He did for a while, but then he abandoned us.
Yeah, I don't know.
What's with that? Come on.
I don't know.
Come on. Heartbroken.
We have bigger fish to fry than
We do have bigger fish to fry.
somebody like Justin's image. So,
though we should fry him on a regular basis. We love him, though.
We could call him Lawrence.
We could, because he would offer the sarcastic remark of being done on one side.
Yeah, that's true.
As our good friend St. Lawrence did.
I love St. Lawrence.
Oh, I do.
I also love the church and its sometimes macabre sense of humor.
Yeah, I know. It's really weird being Catholic. You've got it's a very different culture than what I grew up in as a Protestant, where I don't know. There's a lot of stuff like there's no fish fries. That wasn't a regularly established habit among my Protestant brothers and sisters. At least in the evangelical world that I grew up in, our culture was having our own strange vocabulary and winking at each other whenever we were drunk in the Holy Spirit or odd thing it might be.
Yeah.
And one of the strangest things in Catholic culture for me so far has been this whole idea of relics and incorruptibles. We keep dead people like hanging around at our parishes,
body parts in every single
altar. What the heck is with that? I mean, we can talk about that someday. It's a very fascinating practice that has its roots back to the early church and even in the Bible itself.
Right.
But regardless, it's been a very strange thing for me. It was a big culture clash, culture shift.
Yes. Well, you know, I could take the opportunity here for a very smooth transition because we are talking about intercultural competencies. And I know that you threw the word culture in there for a bridge and a smooth transition. But, you know, I'm willing to sacrifice your brilliance for pointing out your brilliance.
Aw, thanks, Jake.
Yeah, you know, I'll sacrifice a smooth transition for the show for the sake of pointing out that was a really good transition.
Oh, I appreciate that. And speaking of sacrifice.
Oh, boy.
Go
ahead.
You know, one of the beautiful things about the Catholic Church is that the word Catholic itself means universal, or Catholicos, which means like according to the whole, which our listeners, I'm sure, are very, very well aware of. And one of the things that makes Catholicism distinct from many of the other religions in the world is that it doesn't have any particular culture. In fact, there was see, look where I'm going with this here.
Yeah, I see what you're doing.
There was a particular document that's called the Pearl of the Early Church, and in it talks about how Christians do not have a home.
Yeah.
And that they're
Is that Didache?
Oh, no, it's not the Didache. It's something else. It's like the letter Diognetus.
Yeah,
that
the
one.
letter to Diognetus.
Diognetus, yeah. And so the Christians are strangers in every land, but every land is a homeland to them. And the word culture itself actually derives from a word that means worship. And worship always, in human religion, signifies some sort of sacrifice. And so what sort of sacrifice is universal for all men? Well, of course, it's the sacrifice of Jesus Christ, which everyone's invited into.
Boy, you're really doing good with bridges and transitions today.
I'm working on that most of the time.
I got to say I'm impressed.
You should be, because as you know from our regular conversations on a daily basis, and my wife knows this as well, is I will go from one thing to another, and it's connected in my head, but I don't share the connection with most people.
The difference between you and I is, like, if we pulled out a box of vermicelli or spaghetti, I would take them all and line them up perfectly, so it's this one nice, clean string of thought. Whereas for you, you would boil them till they're, like, soft and pliable and maybe even a little mushy, and throw them against the wall, and then that's your brain. and it's all connected, and you know how it's all connected, but it might take me a while to, hear what you're trying to do. So.
It's hard being this brilliant. Or, it's terrible. I found a new way to help out with noodles, by the way.
Oh.
Get the sauce to stick a little better. You boil it till it's just about al dente.
Yeah.
And then you dump out the water, you strain the noodles, and then you put the noodles into the sauce and continue cooking it in the sauce. It soaks into the
You could do that, or if you're a good Italian like I am, you cook them to al dente and then soak them in cold water so they stop cooking.
Yeah, that's an option too, but mine is German because I'm German, and therefore when I boil the noodles or continue cooking the noodles in the sauce invades the noodles.
And let me just point
space.
something out here.
I don't know what's going on.
You're
here.
clearly not Italian because it's pasta, not noodles. What is wrong with you?
Well, I know. I'm using the colloquial term
because you're German, not Italian.
Well, I'm looking for all sorts of noodles here, Jake. It could be the Italian pasta type of dish, or it could be something that's maybe, I don't know, Korean or Thai or Vietnamese, kind of the more diverse.
You're going for multicultural noodle.
I'm going for a multicultural noodle. Maybe
we should use that transition into what we're doing.
So now we're going to really work the old noodle to try to make... If you've stopped listening by now, then nothing I say after this really matters.
And if you haven't stopped listening to us by now, you come to expect it. So, it's all good.
Yeah, we're all very happy here.
Yeah.
Moving on. So we are, as Jake was saying, going to be talking about the Intercultural Competencies Workshop. And this is a part of the effort for the new evangelization that the United States Catholic Conference of Bishops has put together, and that Holy Apostles is actually participating now in. And we actually were able to receive a grant in order to help further...
We are not. You and I are not.
Yeah, we don't get a dime for this, which is fine, because this is an absolute labor of love, because we love exactly what the mission of this workshop is, which of course is the new evangelization, bringing everyone into the encounter with Jesus Christ. And in particular, something that's been happening in the United States for a number of years is that many of our ministries has been run by people who are of one particular culture, and it's been for people of one particular culture, because we've largely, as Catholics, been sort of a monochromatic, kind of. I know. So I'm saying sort of and kind of, because there were the big hiccups in the early part of the United States. Whenever you'd have more immigration, you'd have the German Catholics come in. You'd have the Italians. We'll get there.
We'll get there.
All right. You've got a plan. I'm kind of afraid of what's happening.
Were there a lot of German Catholics that came? They're usually pretty Protestant.
There were German Catholics, actually. St. Agnes and St. Paul was a German parish.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah.
That's why they always use Beethoven and Mozart and Haydn for their music.
Well, there's that, and they actually have taste. I'm sorry, that may have gone over the line.
Well, there are good composers that are not German, such as my favorite, Tchaikovsky.
Tchaikovsky?
Yeah.
Is
Russian.
Are there any links to Russia here, Jake, that we need to know about?
You'll have to talk to Donald Trump.
All right, we'll talk to our president. Anywho, I don't know what's wrong with us. This is great. Okay, so let's talk about this Intercultural Competencies Workshop.
Yeah. There are 5 modules.
Yep, there's 5 modules.
And so for today and then the next 4 weeks, we'll be talking about these 5 modules one at a time. And so today we're going to talk about the general goals and outcomes, as well as, what is evangelization. There's 4 pillars to this. Different challenges that the church faces in the new evangelization in the United States. The new evangelization in a society and church of many cultures, which is not common in other countries. We're one of the few that really, truly have many, many cultures represented. And then a few other kind of symbolic points, such as the church as communion, Catholic, and mission. And so that's what's on deck for today, and then we'll follow up with the next 4 weeks on the next 4 modules.
I think that sounds great. And it should be noted that this material will actually be provided within the packet everybody should receive from Holy Apostles College and Seminary, and if there's any issues with any of the recordings, please let us know, and we can try to rectify that situation.
Well, and to be clear, the packet is not for the general public. It's for the students studying this.
Yep.
So our show is serving kind of a twofold purpose. One, not that the students are studying our show because we're not that brilliant yet, but it's just kind of a supplement to their studies. But it also serves the purpose of getting what the USCCB is trying to teach out to the general populace. And so we're trying to be that bridge to bring philosophy to the common man.
Oh. You see how you bridged the mission of the USCCB and the mission of the Lost Voice Radio? Jacob, hey, two great minds are not present in this studio, but they tend to think alike, or at the very least, mad people. I have no idea where I'm going with that.
I don't know either.
We should just kind of move on to the more interesting stuff that comes from.
Do you want to go through the goals?
Sure, we can certainly go through the goals. So there's a number of goals for this first module, which the module title is Frame Issues of Diversity Theologically in Terms of the Church's Identity and Mission to Evangelize.
I think the USCCB should work on their titles.
Yeah, that's kind of intense.
That's a long title.
You see, that's where I just one of the great things about Latin works is that the title is very, very straightforward. What's the first line in the Tantum hymn? Tantum ergo.
Right.
You just use the first line, and it's brilliant. No, this is something.
Yeah.
This is something else here. It's worse than the titles I give for my papers, but which is bad, by the way. Although I came up with a new one. I'm writing a paper on the fourth way, and I called it "Breathing Fire into the Fourth Way" because fire is used as the analogy. Right.
Good one.
Anywho, so the first goal here is to better understand the meaning and process of evangelization and the new evangelization. Second goal is to examine the U.S. prevailing culture in light of the new evangelization. Third is to explore key ethical and cultural groups in the church, as well as the opportunities and challenges these present for the new evangelization. And finally, to understand the meaning of enculturalization or
evangelization
of cultures.
Yeah.
I have a confession to make to everybody.
Yeah.
I'm actually illiterate.
Are you?
Yeah, I just knew the general topic that was... Oh. So I was making things as go along. I just
you don't want to tell the audience that I read this to you for days and days and days until you memorized the whole thing?
I did not want to tell them that because they don't need to know how much time we actually spend together.
Right.
A lot of people are going to listen to this,
Yeah.
This is going to be great. So
hopefully
or terribly embarrassing,
Wow,
we can keep going down that route too.
Keep going, because we've already started.
Once you're in the water, you might as well swim.
That's right. I'm terrible at swimming, though. So
that's true.
There are three outcomes: the ability to articulate an understanding of the church's mission and identity in terms of evangelization and its relation to the new evangelization. Number two, familiarity with the basic elements of evangelization in terms of four pillars and examples of how evangelization engages in individuals and cultures in today's world. Note that those four pillars are not the four marks of the church. There's four pillars associated with these five modules.
Nor are they the four pillars of the catechism.
Right.
Which is another...
metaphor. Nor are they the four horsemen of the apocalypse.
Nor are they the two pillars that Samson pushed down to destroy thousands of Philistines. Have we covered that enough? Just to make sure we're clear on what the pillars are not?
Yes. This is negative intercultural competencies workshop. We know what it is by what it is not.
Yeah, so apophatic workshop.
Number three of the outcomes is a grasp of the theological foundations for the church's mission to evangelize in Scripture, tradition, and contemporary church teaching. And I would note that the order of that really should be tradition first, and then Scripture, and then finally the not just contemporary church teaching, but the entirety of church teaching. I think the USCCB is saying contemporary based on contemporary issues. How do we reach out to contemporary man? Not that we're only focused on, contemporary church teaching.
Right, because that would be actually contrary to some of what we see with the mission of the Second Vatican Council, which was the Aggiornamento and Ressourcement. And if we were only focusing on the contemporary church teaching, we'd be missing out on some of the great wisdom of the fathers.
Hey, way to use the mission statement of the New England Didache.
It all comes together.
That's right. Yeah, the aggiornamento is the renewal of faith, and ressourcement is the going back to the sources. Mm-hmm. And so we see renewal by way of going back to, St. Robert Bellarmine, St. Thomas Aquinas, St. Augustine, St. Teresa of Avila, not just deciding those people to the past and moving forward, but actually pulling them to the present.
Right, and to be very full with the understanding of what it means to be the sources. When we talk about the sources of theology proper, in particular, we're going to be talking about things like sacred tradition, either through oral tradition or written tradition, and we also would talk about the official teachings of the church. But a part of that, the development of our understanding as Catholics of our faith is going to be found in the great doctors of the church, like the people you had mentioned.
Right.
And again, it's going to be most especially St. Thomas Aquinas, being he's the universal doctor of the church, and has been proclaimed by many various popes to be kind of the guy to go to.
He's the only saint named by name by the church that we are required to study.
We're not going to go there about how we need
more Thomas.
We need more Thomas, but everybody's like, nobody understands Thomas, and I just think, I've explained it to 11-year-olds. Yes, they can.
Yep.
Oh.
That's for another day.
That's another day.
Yeah.
Anywho.
So, the next point, I guess the first point we really need to start with is, what is evangelization? Kind of get down to the nitty-gritty. And if we look at the transformation of the human soul in terms of going from pagan to faithful disciple, there's a process of pre-evangelization, evangelization, catechesis, and theology or theologization. I'm going to make up words.
Yeah.
You need to.
That's the right.
In order to be theologized, you must be catechized. In order to be catechized, you must be evangelized. In order to be evangelized, you have to be pre-evangelized.
And of course, this does result in infinite regress.
So, what do you need before pre-evangelized?
Prime evangelization, kind of like prime matter.
Prime.
It's that part that subsists throughout all the changes of the process.
We know it exists, but we can't actually put our finger on it.
That would probably be contrary to some of the goals of evangelization. People might be kind of weird if you came up and booped them on the nose, That's not a great approach. Kind of like, I just want to note, so I was out shopping at Marshall's just the other day, and I had a couple of people come up to me who I knew were street preachers from the church I grew up in.
Oh, you texted me about
I
this.
know, I'll have to talk about it in the show after this whole workshop's over.
How about we go through this module, and with 5 minutes left, you can talk about...
I'll tell the story.
All right.
It was bad. We'll talk about it, but just one note. Their approach wasn't great. And it's the same approach. It's always, have you heard the good news? And then, so what's that doing? I mean, they're saying, they're going to give us some sort of good news. They're going to give us something. And then they kind of pull the bait and switch thing. You're open the economy's, growing at an exponential rate, or you've got a new job, or here's $1,000. I mean, that'd be fantastic. And then all they tell you is that you can know for sure that you're going to heaven. That's a great news, mind you.
Well, it is if it
true,
right.
Which we'll talk about later, maybe. But the tactic itself, it can be kind of a turnoff. It's gimmicky,
right?
And it's very difficult.
So that's really not what evangelization.
That's not what evangelization
is. Negative
is.
Study of evangelization.
Negative is we're going to keep doing.
We
this
know what it is by what it is not,
because we are not chipper people.
We're negative people.
We are very negative people. Both ontologically and personality-wise,
and philosophically.
The word evangelization, I love this, and this is a huge part of some of the what do you call it? What's the word again? The subversion, the subversive element of Paul's writing, most especially, and even the Gospels themselves. The word evangelization comes from the Greek word evangelion, which essentially just means good news. And within the Greek culture, it had a number of connotations. It could be an emperor's, the birth of a new emperor, the first son of the current emperor, or whatever. It could be a great victory. of a general, or again an emperor, over some enemy, or at some big battle, or some political triumph, or it could be the proclamation of a new law, or it could be the death of an emperor. In which case, interestingly enough, certain captives would be freed. Certain people who were in jail or being punished because of their violation of the laws of the last emperor, they were no longer subject to it. And all of those elements actually play right into Paul's theology, which I think is absolutely beautiful. For instance, the emperor's birth. In the book of Galatians, Paul talks about how in the fullness of time, a man born of a woman who was born under the law is when Christ came. Or when we talk about Christ's victory, Paul talks frequently about Christ's victory over death, especially in 1 Corinthians 15, where he says, "Oh, death, where is your sting? Where is your victory? Oh, sin, where is your victory?" And then he goes on to talk about the resurrection of Christ, the proclamation of a new law. Paul frequently talks about the cessation of the law of death and the new law of life. And in particular, I mentioned before about the death of one emperor leads to the freedom of certain captives. Now, Paul talks about how the law brought death, and within that law there were certain curses that were inflicted upon people, and upon Christ's victory over that law, and then the acceptance of the gospel, which leads to our renewal and a putting on of the new man. Guess what? We enter into Christ's freedom. And so the law and the curses and the punishments that were doled out to us because of the former life that we had lived as post-lapsarian humans is now under the process of undoing because of what Christ has done on the cross. And that's the good news, is that we're freed.
Yeah.
Great, yeah.
I don't have a whole lot else to add.
Yeah, I mean, there's a number of other things with...
Well, maybe I'll just read what the church says.
Yeah, go right ahead. I think that's a great idea. In fact, that's exactly what I was hoping you would do.
The church has received from the apostles Christ's solemn command to proclaim the truth which saves, and it must carry it to the very ends of the earth. This is Lumen Gentium number 17. The USCCB continues and says, to evangelize means literally to spread the good news. At the heart of that message is the encounter with Jesus Christ and the salvation he brings to the world. From that encounter comes incorporation of the body of Christ, which is the church. One thing I would note here is, I think, kind of piggybacking on your talking about St. Paul, is the whole point of this workshop can be really summed up in, I believe it was the book of Colossians, but you're the former Protestant, so you'll have to remind me or correct me. When St. Paul talks about his failure at Athens.
That's
No, Corinthians.
No, it was at the failure of Athens, because he went to...
No, it was the failure in Athens, and he writes about it in... was it... Which book did he write about that in?
So are you saying, like, which book it was that Paul's talking about where he failed, or as in, like, when the event happened, or are you talking about the book he wrote about it?
In one of the books, he wrote about his failure at Athens and how he... basically, he was not speaking to the culture of the Athenians. He was speaking past them, and he was run out of town under threat of death. And he went to the next town, and that's when he speaks about how he is only going to preach Christ crucified.
Oh, yeah, that's going to be the Corinthians.
Yeah.
Yes.
Corinthians.
Yeah, because he... I know what you're talking about now.
Yep.
Yeah, and the... one of the things that he did, which I think was... like I said, a mistake on his part, was he went to Mars Hill.
Yep.
And at Mars Hill, he saw all the different pagan deities, and then he saw the one to the altar to the unknown God, which there's a number of different ways of understanding that one.
Yeah.
But he went on and said, "This is Jesus Christ that you guys are missing out on." And there's this resurrection of the dead and everything. And what happened to Paul was that he played into a negative aspect of Greek culture at that time.
Yeah.
Because in the book of Acts, it talks about how the Athenians just kind of like to hang out and hear new ideas. And part of the reason for that was because they didn't have TV or internet or video games or a whole host of other things by which they could entertain themselves. And so what they would do is they would actually hire people to come by and tell them something, tell them a story, preach to them, give them some sort of rhetorical flair, and that was their entertainment. That was something Paul talked about frequently, as in, he would say things like, "I'm not taking any money from you. You're not my patron. I'm doing these things for free. If I took any money from anybody, it was like a gift or covering an expense, that kind of thing."
Right.
And so Paul fell into a negative aspect of the culture, but he certainly could have used their that same idea of using good rhetoric and whatnot to and preach to them.
Yeah, and my point here is with this is that St. Paul didn't take into account the culture to which he was speaking.
Yep.
And he saw great failure at Athens, and he lamented that. And in the next town, he understood his failure and changed his tactic. He didn't change the message. He changed how the message was presented. And really with this intercultural workshop, that's something we need to understand is that we can't change the message of the gospel. We cannot change truth because truth is reality. So we can't change that, but what we can change and adapt is how we present that truth to a particular kind of culture. And Aristotle talks about this in his Art of Rhetoric, that when you speak to youth, that's different than if you speak to the elderly. It's different than if you speak to men, to women, to, every different group has a different way that's going to best receive a particular message. And so that's part of the reality of being Catholic and spreading the good news of Jesus Christ is understanding the groups to whom we speak and to the people to whom we speak. And so, this first module makes reference to Pope Paul VI document Evangelii Nuntiandi, and in that he talks about how more and more youth need to be apostles to the youth. Mm-hmm. Okay, well, great. That's most certainly true.
Right.
But if that's true for the youth, isn't that true for every culture?
Right. Because that, we're more equipped to handle people who are, you and I are, I think, kind of on the leading edge of millennials.
We're on the leading edge.
We're on the leading edge everywhere. We're number one. Huge. We're winning. I'm tired of winning.
I'm not tired of winning.
Me. It'd be nice to start, actually. But in any case, millennials, I've noticed that in my own youth ministry experience. Okay, number one, I'm weird. All right, so that's just all there is to it. And so people are going to think, dude, if Studi's there, I don't want to go. But
I think if Studi's there, I do want to go.
Well, that's because you know something's going to happen, and it's going to be a show. But what I've noticed is there are certain kids who I really connect with and everything. Yeah. But what's more effective is once I start training those kids who already speak my language and love the Lord and want to be a part of this mission of growth and discipleship, they then become, like you said, apostles to the youth. And it's through their word of mouth that my ministry has grown more than anything else. And I think this is a part of the new evangelization called the Second Vatican Council's mandate to read the signs of the times and really understand the language that people are using, which doesn't necessarily mean, like you said, we don't want to change the gospel. We can't do that.
And a quick caveat with that is too many people hear the signs of the times and they think that we need to adapt our message to match the signs of the times and to accept the signs of the times. And the church is not democratic. It is not something formed by popular opinion. The reading the signs of the times is a tool by which we can kind of read and adapt based on the reading of that information of the current culture, the best way to communicate.
Yes.
And, in my work, it's talked frequently about using media, use videos, use social media, use all this stuff. And, that's all true. And certainly the culture today uses media and social media more than any other culture ever has.
Absolutely.
According, even if you take into account, let's just say, inflation of media technologies. We use it way more than any other culture ever has. But, the other side of that, too, is if we only use the tools of the times, we run the risk of getting lost in the ocean. If our approach is the exact same as everybody else, it's going to fail. And that's where the aggiornamento and ressourcement is so important, yes, use the current tools, use the current models, read the signs of the times, use the tools the culture has to give you, but also seek renewal by going back to the sources. What is the source of human communication? Person to person.
Yeah.
And so if we can incorporate that with the media and use the person to person as the basis and the media as a tool, we're going to be highly successful in evangelization.
And on that, just very quickly here, one of the something very important about that is the principle of the gold of Egypt. And so if we remember the Exodus story, when Israel left, they plundered the Egyptians. And so what happened? All right, they took this gold from Egypt, and they brought it out to the Promised Land. And now some of that gold went into what? The golden calf.
The golden calf.
But some of it went into the construction of the Ark of the Covenant. And so there are certain elements of our culture which can truthfully be incorporated into the
patrimony of faith.
Into the patrimony of faith, exactly. But not every part can be.
Right.
Like polka masses. Or paper-mache puppet heads.
Did you really just go there?
I'm going to go there. I don't even care.
I agree. We need to call for the abolishment of polka masses.
Yeah. If there's a certain friend of ours who's listening.
Yeah. He would agree.
Oh, no, we're talking about she.
Oh, she would agree, too. Yeah. I don't know.
You don't know sign language? I was trying to tell. Okay, anyway. We have a friend who works at a parish who had a polka mass not long ago, and we don't want to mention her name.
Oh, right.
Yeah. Okay. There you go.
Yeah.
There you go. But
it's confusing. And it's not that, okay, so where does polka derive from? Isn't it like Poland and the kind of the northeastern block of
I have no
Europe?
idea.
I think polka's from like Poland and Germany and that kind of area. And there's nothing wrong with polka. It's fun to dance to polka. It's a jovial kind of music for festivals, and it's fun.
And everybody loves the dots.
Yeah, and and accordions are really cool. I like the accordion.
Fascinating.
But that part of the culture is not appropriate for certain parts of the church. Mm-hmm. We should have polka music at parish festivals. I think that'd be awesome.
Yes.
And couple it with the beer tent. Like, what better festival is there than polka music and beer? That's awesome.
Both of which are required to enjoy the other.
Right. But within the liturgy, polka may not be the best thing for the liturgy.
Right.
Because it doesn't really speak to the transcendence of God. And so it's enculturating, it's bringing certain aspects of the culture into certain aspects of the church while understanding the proper role of those cultural aspects and what the dignity of certain parts of the church require.
Right.
And so it's like, in your grade school tests when you had the two lists of words and you had to match the word to the definition.
Right.
It's kind of doing that with culture and the life of the church. Mm-hmm. Not everything goes according to both things. Like, polka music in the Mass probably doesn't work. Mass, say, celebrated for fun outside when you could celebrate in the beauty of the church, that's not appropriate either. But, to use the vernacular, to use Spanish, to use English, to use Vietnamese, whatever it is, within the Mass is acceptable. And so it's looking at that. But, like I said, too, maybe polka music doesn't work in the Mass, but it most certainly works at parish festival. It could work in, other aspects of the life of the church. Maybe you're doing a school fundraiser or gala or something, and you have a German-themed gala, and you have German beer and sauerkraut and polka music and all, and
sounds like a great school.
Lederhosen.
What is this?
Yeah, everybody has to wear lederhosen. It'd be great.
That'd be fun, actually. Yeah.
It would be fun.
It's a good idea.
Yeah.
I'll talk to my boss.
Please do.
My new boss, actually.
I'll wear lederhosen for you.
Oh, by the way, I went back and looked through some of my pictures at my wedding.
Oh boy!
I'm so glad you changed your beard. Your beard.
Yeah.
I see why you didn't get married for a while.
Wow.
Just kidding.
That's so uncalled for me. And
oh no, I was saying that because you're so good looking, it was intimidating. Jake,
nice try.
Jake, I love you. Come on, man.
Nice try.
Come on. I'm sorry. Anyway, so then I think we're going to talk a little bit more about the appropriate use of culture a little bit later. So there's a few comments you and I have chatted about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Probably.
Yeah, I think we're talking about that. There's a few things you and I
we
have
have
talked
4
about.
more weeks, too.
We do have 4 more
and
weeks.
And the point of the polka mass, and just so nobody sends hate mail to Studi about his hatred of Pokemasses, is that we're seeking to find the appropriate use of culture within the parish. It's not accepting every bit of culture.
Right.
Because, let's face it, not every bit of the American culture is good. Not every bit of any culture is good. There's goods and bads to every culture.
Like awkward socially awkward insult humor.
Right.
It wouldn't be good for us during the sign of peace to pick out the one thing in the other person and make fun of them for it.
Right. So why do you do that to me?
I'm trying to demonstrate apophatically principles which shouldn't be applied in Mass.
Okay, good work then.
Look at that transition.
So I think we pretty well clear up what evangelization is, and actually time is flying by. We're already we only have 20 minutes left.
We can do this.
But the 4 pillars of this workshop are conversion, the evangelization of cultures, liberation, and ecumenical and interreligious dialogue. And this loosely follows the commission of Paul VI in his document Ecclesiam Suum for the renewal of the church, when he talks about we need awareness, renewal, dialogue. And that awareness, renewal, dialogue process is that the church, as well as her individual members, need to become aware of themselves, their own sin, their need for mercy, who they are, and who God is.
Good.
The second part, which that leads into, is then with that information and awareness, they have a conversion. And so they have a change of heart and a change of life. From that comes the third step of dialogue. Once you have the change of life, you have to now dialogue the life and love of Jesus Christ to your fellow man to help them become aware, thus starting the threefold process over for them. And this isn't a one-and-done process. Once you hit dialogue, you need to become even more deeply aware of who you are and who God is. And so it's a continual conversion through life. And I venture to guess they don't make reference to it in the USCCB documents, but I would bet you any money somebody at the USCCB said, hey, let's follow Ecclesiam Suum, because this is exactly following Paul VI format with slight adaptations. So,
which is good. I mean, that's just the natural process of conversion too. St. James talks about how the perfect law is like a mirror. That in the perfect law for James is the law of Christ. Perfect law is like a mirror. What kind of man would look in the mirror and notice how messy his face is and not wash it?
Right.
You got something.
Do I have something on my face?
You're looking at me pretty intently there, Jake.
Yeah.
Yeah, actually I haven't shaved. I should. Because unlike Jake, I can't actually really grow a beard, so I get this this creepy neck beard creeper stash. And
I shaved this morning, and I already look like I belong in a forest.
Is this like the Santa Claus movie?
I don't remember that movie.
With Tim Allen, he'd shave, and then 30
yeah.
seconds later it'll grow back, which I could imagine would be terribly painful.
Yeah, that wouldn't be fun.
I don't think I'd like that. And anyway, moving on to what I was saying is just like the Bible says, it's if you see something wrong, the natural instinct is to fix it, or at least you'd certainly hope that to be the case. And the only way to fix that is through the encounter with Jesus Christ.
Right. Do we want to talk more deeply about the 4 pillars individually, or there's conversion, evangelization of cultures, liberation, and ecumenical interreligious dialogue. You know what? I think the only thing that we really need to dive into is the liberation piece, because I think there's a lot of confusion of what that means. I mean, briefly, conversion, it's a changing of life.
Sure.
Right? Evangelization of cultures, we need to be a church in the culture, not of the culture.
Right.
We need to be people in the culture, not of it. We need to transform cultures. And in one of my classes, I pointed out that there was a study done that it takes only a maximum of 10% of the population to actually have massive upheaval of an idea.
Yeah, I remember that. Dr. Herman talked about that.
Yeah, I just talked about that too.
I know.
Yeah.
We had the same professor.
Oh, I read the study like a week ago.
Oh,
and I would actually posit that it takes even less now with social media.
Yeah, you're probably right.
But with that being said, what does it say about us that as Catholics we can't even get 10% of the Catholic population to drive ideas home of what the Eucharist is and what confession is and that sort of thing?
Uh-huh.
That's a pretty sad statistic, but it matches actually a study that Matthew Kelly did that something like 6% of Catholics do 90% of the work. and give 90% of the money.
Oh my goodness.
So we can't even get 10% of our parish to do basic things like donate on Sunday, let alone follow an idea.
Yeah, that's an interesting thing. I mean, it kind of goes to the principle of how do you eat an elephant? Well, one bite at a time. Maybe our goal could be getting to that 10%.
Now, you and I have shared camel burgers before. Have you eaten elephant?
This isn't normal?
No. I don't think that's legal.
I think I need to talk to my wife about her poaching habits.
Yeah, no kidding. So we have liberation. Do you want to talk about liberation?
Yeah, we can talk about liberation theology a bit here. So liberation, let's talk about real liberation theology by, again, apophatic. What is real liberation theology not? Blah, excuse me. So liberation theology, that term itself is probably fairly familiar for a number of our listeners. And it was a term first used in 1971 by I think it was a Peruvian priest named Father Gutierrez. And it really has its beginnings in 1955 Brazil. And a part of the idea is that they were using this principle of liberation in Scripture, this term of liberation and being free in Christ, to really more or less mean economic or political freedom.
Freedom from dictatorship.
Freedom from dictatorships, that kind of stuff. And so kind of an example where there's a good contrast between authentic liberation theology and this kind of liberation theology, which misses the mark. It has some elements of truth to it. Is the Exodus story. Again, we can return to this. A lot of the Christian faith is contained right in there. And so we are all very familiar with Moses and what he was doing for the Israelites when they were in captivity. And he would always come up to Pharaoh before every plague and say, "Let my people go," right? And then he'd do his thing, and then Pharaoh's heart was hardened, and he didn't let him go. Well, that's not the full story. Part of this liberation theology, what they would do is they'd look at this passage and say that God's mission was to try and give the people of Israel an economic and political and social liberty which they had not enjoyed beforehand, and that was the main mission of Moses's participation in God's plan for Israel at that time. But really, often we forget what the second part of Moses' request was. It was, "Let my people go and worship." And the crazy thing was, it was just for 3 days.
Yeah.
3 days. 3 days to Sunday from Friday. Get it?
Yeah.
You see more parallels here? It's like God wrote history and then did things in it.
It's almost like he had a plan.
It's almost like he had a plan. It's almost like, anyway, moving on from this. So the idea is that what God wanted was not necessarily, of course, he doesn't want people to be in political bondage or oppression. But what he really desired for his people was this spiritual liberation from the idolatry in Egypt. And this isn't something that the liberation theologians will focus on. Rather, they focus on trying to bring about social justice, which has its own particular definition, and that's usually the equality of all people in terms of what sort of rights are afforded to each one of them in particular. That's where we see things like the transgender movement.
Well, and equality needs to be explained too, because equality and equanimity are two different things.
There you go.
And the best way to look at this is equality of mathematics and equality of proportion. And so equality of mathematics is that everybody is absolutely and in every way completely equal, meaning that 2 is equal to 2. So, Studi, we're somehow offending equality because I'm 6'2" and you're not. And that simply wouldn't be realistic in any way, but that's the type of equality that's shouted for constantly, is the push to make everything absolutely and utterly equal. But the proper understanding of equality among peoples is not mathematical equality, it's equality of proportion. Mm-hmm. And so, yes, all men and women are required to have their dignity respected, right? All people have a right, an equal right, to work and to labor. But let's just be realistic. My right to labor as a 6'2", 185-pound man, I have an equality of proportion to, say, a 5'2", 100-pound woman. You know, if we go to a job site and it's all about brute muscle, I'm probably going to get the job before the 5'2", 100-pound woman because I can lift more. That's not an inequality. That's equality based on proportion. Now, she could still have a job within the work site, you know, and that needs to be considered by the hiring employer. But to say that we have an equal ability to do the job would be an error in equality of mathematics.
Yeah, you're right. And ultimately that, even in just that simple example, too, of you and the 500-pound woman.
Well, that would still be a different.
There would still be a different kind of equality there. In boboth cases, if it required a lot of heavy lifting and physical labor, it would be an injustice to that woman because a 100-pound, 5-foot woman picking up, a 100-pound bag of cement mix, it's gonna kill her.
Right.
It's going to be horrible.
Well, to do that all day, I mean, it would kill me, too.
Well, right, but you're more capable of at least doing it a few times or maybe for half an hour.
And that's not a slight to the woman in that regard. Not in any way. It's recognizing the legitimate differences in that situation and to give the equal dignity and opportunity based on the proportionality of the individuals. That's important because we can't have this understanding of equality based on mathematics. Otherwise, we're going to get really screwed up, and that's really important in this intercultural initiative that, you know, cultures as a whole need to be treated equally, but not mathematically. Mm-hmm. They need to be treated equally in terms of proportion. And so, you know, that's recognizing the good in each culture, but recognizing that cultures are, in fact, different.
Right. Well, people are, in fact, different. What's due to them is, in fact, different. So different people have different rights depending on certain situations. I mean, a person who has... let's just go right for the jugular here.
Oh, boy.
If you're ever attacked by a group of clowns, always go for the jugular. Again, if you're still listening, God bless you. In any case,
and if you're not still listening, God bless you for your wisdom.
In either case, may God bless us, everybody. Right? That's how it goes? I don't know.
Something like that.
Anyway, so we're going for the jugular. With the gay marriage movement, people talk about having equal rights as a gay person. The thing and letting them get married to whoever they want. Well, the distinction here is that they have equal rights to heterosexual people already because they already had the right to get married to somebody of the opposite sex.
Right.
It is a different right. It is a different thing afforded to them to let them
That's
get
a
married.
fair point.
I know, right? To let them get married to somebody who is of the same sex. You and I now in Minnesota could get married, provided we divorced our wives first, which we don't want to. Which we're not going to do.
No. For so many reasons.
Yes. It'd be like the Odd Couple, except with more
odd
and more cement shoes. I'm sure.
Yeah.
But we do a lot of work projects together. I'm
right.
guessing. But in any case, it's not a right due to them, and it's not due to them because of what they are. They're still human. They just have a particular inclination, which is disordered objectively from their nature. And this is actually where I think that people who engage in liberation theology or are over-focused on social justice to the point where they're saying that everybody has rights according to their desires, I think they're in a bind here for two reasons. One, first, they could affirm that there is they could affirm that there is a common nature and end for all people, and therefore a common right due to all people.
Yep.
Or they could deny that and say, and then from that it follows that there is no common end or right to people, and that people are more or less good or whatever according to how useful they happen to be, or just based on some sort of arbitrary standard. Now, if they affirm the first, then it's fairly easy to reason or to demonstrate that things like gay marriage and abortion and contraception are simply not rights.
Yeah.
But if they embrace the second horn, then it leads us to concentration camps and extermination and eugenics and really just the brave new world as a whole, because it denies the essential character and dignity due to all people.
Right.
Which is the foundation point of this idea of liberation, is that it's based on human dignity.
Yeah, and the liberation theology in the improper sense really gets stuck in the idea that the Jews had just prior to Christ coming, that the idea of the Messiah was going to liberate us from injustice in this world. And that's simply not the case. The Messiah came to free us from sin and establish his kingdom on earth and in heaven, not to simply redeem us from a Caesar of, ill repute. And so we need to understand the difference there. And this workshop is talking about liberation in the proper sense of how do we bring the redemption and saving truth of Jesus Christ to all peoples within their socioeconomic world and their cultural background and everything. It's not saying we need to bring a liberation in terms of liberating us from the trials of this life.
Right.
It's a liberation that we might be detached from all things and attached only to Christ.
I agree. That's the gospel we talked about a little bit earlier.
Right.
We're freed from the old man, the old law,
Right.
because we're redeemed in Christ.
We got to keep moving here. The challenges of the new evangelization in the United States. There are a number of challenges, and in this section it talks about how more and more people are not identifying with any religion. Mm-hmm. This isn't simply challenges interculturally, but it's a challenge across all cultures.
Yep.
And I don't know if we need to talk too much about that. There's challenges with the youth and young adults. What's the statistic that if you don't make a conscious choice for Jesus Christ by 13, there's a 90% chance you never will?
Yeah, it's if you're in a religious school, it's 13, and if you're in a non-religious school, it's 10 now.
Yeah. So there's that reality. There's the reality that if a father is not involved with their children's faith life, and it even goes to such a degree that if dad is the one that gets little Johnny dressed for church, not even if dad is saying we need to go to church, but if dad just dresses Johnny for church, the statistics are mind-blowing of what happens. So if a dad is not involved in their kid's life in terms of the faith, it's something like 96% of kids fall away from the church.
Yeah, it's huge.
If dad is involved even to the degree that he dresses his child for church, it's something like 75 or 80% chance that kids stay in the faith.
Wow.
I mean, it's drastic numbers. And so one of the big challenges I see in the church is from the 1960s on, this emasculating of the church. It's taking away the masculinity within the church. And we see this in different ways, and this would be a great topic for another day on iconoclasm, because that's an act of emasculation. Yeah,
interesting.
I have good theories on this.
Oh, I want to hear it.
You should read my LinkedIn profile. I just wrote a short thing on it.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll read your LinkedIn profile.
Please do. Anybody else could read my LinkedIn profile, too. Try and find Jacob Nelson on LinkedIn.
Which, of course, is why you named your son the way you did.
That's right. I'm associated with Holy Apostles College and Seminary on there, though.
That'll help, yeah.
Yeah, that will help. But there's the reality, the challenge of men in the church, and if anybody out there's like, well, geez, you guys are talking about equality and how men and women really aren't equal because they're only equal in proportion, not mathematics. Now you're talking about men in the church, and that's the real problem. Go to daily mass. Look around. How many men are there? How many women are there?
I read a book on this one. And there was a study done about the gender gap in churches. And while it's the case that roughly 50% of the population is male and 50% of the population is female, within churches, the gap, it averages about 12% difference between the two. But in Catholic churches, I think it's like 65% female and 35% male.
Holy cow.
Yeah.
I would also argue one of the great challenges is just even the basic teaching on the sacraments. Mm-hmm. A study done, and it was probably 10 years ago now, was that 78% of U.S. Catholics do not believe in the Eucharist. Well, why even be Catholic?
I don't know.
And it's no wonder that only something like 6% of people in a parish actually contribute 90% of the money.
Right.
When only 22% of your parish believes in the Eucharist.
Right.
And if only 22% believe in the Eucharist, how much percentage of your parish is even going to confession?
Yeah, and that's I think some of this comes back to what you were talking about earlier about when it comes to our engagement with the culture. We can't become a part of it in terms of the wicked aspects of the culture, or just incorporating everything. And one of the areas that I see this in is this idea of is individualism and materialism within the church.
Right.
So often we will hear, I think I'll talk about that in a second. Pope, I'll just go straight there. Pope Benedict XVI said something like, "There are as many paths to God as there are
as many paths to God as there are people, but there's only one path to God.
But there's only one path to God, which is Jesus Christ."
Right.
And what we have there is an authentic understanding of the way we approach Christ. There's this oneness and manyness. It comes back to this philosophical concept that was developed thousands of years ago, that there's everything, that there's somehow a manyness to the reality, but there's also a oneness that's necessary as well. And both are required in order to have a coherent understanding of the way the world works. It's the same way with the faith. We can't make up doctrines for ourselves, and
right.
I think a lot of Catholics have fallen into this habit of allowing religious education teachers, whether it be in the parish or the school, to look at kids' opinions and say, all your opinions are equal, which is the pluralistic or the.
They're all equal in the fact that they were sad.
Yeah, they're all equal in the fact they were sad. Yeah, they're all opinioned. They're all equal in the same way that they all have armpits because they all stink. Teenagers,
right.
Boys, wear your deodorant once you hit about 11 years old. But in any case, I think that there's a big problem with a lot of a number of the approaches that contemporary religious education has taken in terms of stressing a person's opinion, their own liberty of conscience, and the like, to the point where it's left the true unity of the faith, of it really being a part of the Catholic tradition, and seeing it as where the reality would be you should see each person's expression of the truth as their individual contribution, but it needs to be an expression of the one truth. Whereas now what we're doing is everybody defines their own truth, and that even happens in a lot of Catholic parishes, which, if I tell you, Jake, for instance, or parents will do this too, they'll say, you choose whatever religion you want at the time at a certain age. What that tells you is, Jake, you choose any ice cream you want. You're going to choose whatever ice cream feels good to you, whatever tastes best in most situations. Right. So it's the same way with the faith. What we're doing is we're reducing faith in religion down to the level, in morality even, down to the level of mere opinion and desire. Right. And that tells us that it's not much more important than ice cream or another thing that just is a personal
right.
taste.
And we have to start wrapping up. We only have a couple minutes left because time flies when you're having fun. But one other challenge I would like to point out, and this is a real challenge for parishes today, is that Canon 518 in the Code of Canon Law, and I'm not an expert in canon law, but this is something that I think could be picked apart a little bit. It says, as a general rule, a parish is to be territorial. That is a change from the 1917 Code, because it implies the burden of language. And so, in the 1917 Code, and before that, you'd have waves of immigrants coming to America, and on the same street corner, you'd have the German Catholic Church, the Italian Catholic Church, and the French Catholic Church. And then along comes the Irish Catholic Church. And the bishop at the time didn't necessarily have priests to assign to all these parishes, and the Germans, the Italians, the French, and the Irish would bring their priests from their home countries, and you'd have 4 Catholic parishes on the same street corner. And so if you go into, New York City, you go to northeast Minneapolis, you go to these older parts of cities, you'll notice there's like 1 million Catholic churches in one spot.
Right.
And it's because the churches at that time were organized by language and culture. And what's changed since 1983 is that the burden of language is on the parish. And so you have very specific parish boundaries. And if you have within those boundaries people who speak Spanish, French, Portuguese, Afrikaans, English, the parish is supposed to provide for all of those people. And we're talking about it in a time when parishes are already stretched so thin with resources, personnel, money, etc. It's very hard. This canon goes on to say, when it is expedient, however, personal parishes are to be established, determined by reason of the right language or nationality of the Christian faithful, or some territory, even some other reason. And so it says you can organize a parish by language, but when it's expedient. The norm is that it's by territory, and if that's the case, then the parish has to provide for everybody within that territory, even up to, X amount of languages. So that's a real challenge today, I think, to really deal with intercultural issues.
Well, it makes me appreciate our priest over at the parish that we attend. He speaks like 3 languages.
Yeah. With that, we didn't quite finish this module today. And so if you want to study further, just go to usccb.org, highlight the Issues and Action button, and down below you'll see Cultural Diversity. Click on that, and then on the left-hand side, you'll see in bold Intercultural Competencies, and then you can select any of the 5 modules. We're in Module 1 today. We can probably do a little bit next week on it, and then really dive into number 2. If you have any questions, concerns, comments, other things that you want to talk to us about, please feel free to email us at lostvoice@wcatradio.com. I got it right this time, lostvoice@wcatradio.com. Yeah, I don't have anything else. John, do you have anything else?
Actually, I'm going to just make sure that that's right, because now I'm doubting myself. It is the Lost Voice or WCATradio.com. Never doubted Jacob.
No, it's not the Lost Voice.
No,
it's Lost Voice.
Wait, did I say the? Yeah. No, it is Lost Voice at WCATradio.com. No, I've got nothing else to say except that my listeners, I really appreciate your time, your patience, your love, understanding, and prayers. And for the Lost Voice Radio, for Jacob Nelson and WCAT Radio as a whole, and myself, I bid you farewell, and I pray that we helped bring you the wisdom of Socrates, which we are trying to recover for you people here in the modern times.
We hope you enjoyed the program and will join us back for another show on WCAT Radio. This is Sebastian Mahfood. Good day.